You know what's fascinating? In almost every long-term relationship, there's this silent little gap between what one partner wants and what the other thinks they want. And nowhere is that gap bigger than when we talk about variety in the bedroom. Most women would be shocked at how many men, even the ones who seem perfectly satisfied, have a mental wish list of positions or playful scenarios they've never brought up. And it's not because they're unhappy with what's happening now. It's because they've learned over time that asking can feel risky. See, a lot of men were taught, consciously or not, that they should be grateful for whatever they're getting. That pushing for more might make them look ungrateful or pervy, or that they might get a raised eyebrow followed by a, "Where did you learn that?" And so they keep quiet. But here's the thing, that quiet doesn't mean the desire isn't there. In fact, that quiet often means the desire is even stronger, because there's no safe outlet for it. I've spoken to men who will swear they're not the type to have a specific fantasy, and yet 2 minutes later, if you make them feel safe, they'll tell you exactly what they wish they could try. Not once, but over and over, until it becomes part of their shared intimacy. And the common thread in these stories, almost every man admits they never expected their partner to suggest it first. If she did, they'd feel like they'd won the romantic lottery. The curiosity gap works both ways. Women often underestimate how much men enjoy the thrill of being surprised, of having something new presented to them without having to ask for it. This isn't just about pleasure in a physical sense, it's about the psychological rush of feeling desired in a fresh, exciting way. Imagine this, you walk into the room and your partner doesn't just go with the same rhythm you've always had, but suddenly shifts into something unexpected, something you didn't even think they'd want to try. That's not just variety, that's a jolt of electricity to the connection you share. Now, I know some people hear this and think, well, if it matters that much, why don't men just speak up? But relationships aren't a technical manual, they're emotional ecosystems. And men often worry that introducing a new idea will be interpreted as dissatisfaction with what's already there. And let's be honest, if the timing's wrong or the tone's off, that suggestion can sound less like an adventure and more like a critique. Here's where you have an incredible opportunity. When you're the one to introduce something new without being asked, you completely bypass the awkwardness. It becomes a gift instead of a request. And that changes the energy in the room from, "I hope this goes well," to "This is amazing." The other thing to remember is that the gap isn't always about extreme or elaborate ideas. Sometimes the things men would love to try are actually simple shifts, positions they've only seen in passing, or variations that add a little novelty. But because they don't want to risk seeming demanding, they'll never bring them up. That's where your curiosity can bridge the gap. You don't need to become someone else or act out a movie scene. You just need to be willing to step into that slightly unfamiliar space, to see his eyes light up at the fact that you did something he's secretly been hoping for. And here's the kicker. When you start exploring that curiosity gap, it doesn't just satisfy him. It changes the way he looks at you. It deepens trust. It makes him feel like you see him in a way that most people never will. And men remember those moments for years. They're not thinking about how perfect the execution was. They're thinking, "She wanted to try something new with me. She wanted me to feel that." That is intoxicating. Now, I'm not saying you have to run a full-time creativity lab in your relationship. What I'm saying is, if you can close that gap even occasionally, you'll see a shift in the way he engages with you. Because the truth is, Variety is rarely just about novelty. It's about showing that you're still curious about each other, still exploring, still discovering. So the next time you think about what he might want, remember, the biggest surprise isn't just the act itself, it's that you thought of it without him having to ask. That alone can change the whole dynamic in ways you can't even imagine. It's funny, when people hear that men have things they want to try but never mention, their first reaction is usually, well, if they really wanted it, they'd just say so. But the reality is, most men don't work like that when it comes to intimacy. There's this whole unspoken set of reasons that make them keep quiet, even with someone they love and trust. And if you understand those reasons, you can see how easy it is for a man to silently carry his desires for years without ever letting them out. From a young age, or men are conditioned to think they have to be careful with how they express themselves in relationships. They hear messages like, "Don't be too pushy," "Don't scare her off," or "Don't make it about you." On one hand, those messages can teach respect, which is great. But on the other hand, they can create this internal filter where a man starts second, guessing every desire he has. Before the thought even leaves his lips, he's already wondering, what if she thinks I'm weird? What if she thinks I'm not happy with her? That inner dialogue shuts the door before the conversation even starts. And here's the thing, even men who are confident, charismatic, and completely in love with their partner can struggle with this. It's not about how much he trusts you, it's about the risk of being misunderstood. The bedroom is a vulnerable place, and for a lot of men, suggesting something new feels like stepping out on a tightrope. One wrong reaction, one awkward silence, and he'll retreat. Not just for that moment, sometimes for good. I've had men tell me stories where they finally built up the courage to suggest something, and their partner's first reaction wasn't even negative. It was just neutral or confused. And in that moment, they took it as a rejection. They thought, okay, she's not into it. I won't bring it up again. Even if she might have been open to it later, the moment had already closed for him. So instead of pushing, he files it away in the mental drawer labeled, "Things I'll keep to myself." There's also pride at play here. A lot of men tie their sense of masculinity to being enough for their partner exactly as they are, doing exactly what they've been doing. If they bring up something new in their mind, they risk admitting that the current routine might not be perfect. That can feel like admitting weakness. And even though we know that's not how healthy relationships work, that's the reality for many guys. So they choose to protect their pride and their ego rather than risk an intimate rejection. But there's another layer. Fear of changing the dynamic. Men often believe that if they introduce something their partner doesn't like, it could create a kind of invisible tension that lingers. It's not just, she didn't want to do it. It's, no, she's wondering why I wanted it, what it means about me, and if she can trust what we've been doing. That fear makes it safer in their minds to say nothing at all. The irony is, silence doesn't mean the desire goes away. It just sits there, quietly influencing how much excitement they feel, how adventurous they are, how connected they feel over time. That's why you might see a man seem less engaged or less energized in intimacy. Not because he's lost attraction, but because he's stopped believing certain parts of himself will ever be welcome. And yet, here's the twist. Many of these men are not looking for some grand, outlandish fantasy. Often, it's something small, playful, or physically simple. But to them, it represents a different kind of connection. It's the difference between feeling like their partner is just going along with a routine and feeling like she's actively curious about their pleasure. When that curiosity is missing, they don't always know how to ask for it without feeling like they're crossing a line. When you start to see this from their perspective, it changes the game. You stop thinking, why doesn't he just say it? And start thinking, what can I do to make him feel like it's safe to say it? Because once a man feels that safety, you'll be amazed at what comes out, not just in terms of positions or fantasies, but in the way he opens up emotionally, the way he trusts you with more of himself. And here's the real secret. You don't even have to directly ask, "And what do you want to try?" Sometimes it's enough to make playful hints that you're open to experimenting, that you're not going to react with shock or judgment. That little signal can flip a switch in his mind from, "Better not mention it," to, "Maybe this is my chance." Men aren't always quiet because they don't care enough to say something. Often, they're quiet because they care too much about how you'll feel when they do. And that means if you can create the kind of space where he knows curiosity is welcome, you're not just giving him permission to share what he wants. You're giving your relationship permission to grow in ways it never could otherwise. One of the most underrated truths about intimacy is that the human brain craves novelty. It's not just about the physical side of things, although that's certainly part of it. It's about the way something new can light up the mind and completely shift the emotional energy between two people. You can have two people who adore each other, who have amazing chemistry, but if the experiences between them become too predictable, the excitement that once felt effortless can start to fade. And it's not because the love is gone, it's because our brains are wired to respond to surprise. Think about the early stages of a relationship. Every touch, every kiss, every moment feels electric. That's not just because it's a new person. It's because it's a new experience. You're in discovery mode, both physically and emotionally. You don't know exactly what's going to happen next, and that uncertainty keeps you engaged in a way that routine simply can't replicate. Over time, as you get to know each other and settle into patterns, that edge starts to dull. You might still love each other deeply, but the spark isn't as easily lit because your brain isn't being fed anything it hasn't already seen 100 times. Now here's where trying new positions, the ones he's been secretly curious about, becomes so powerful. You're not just changing the physical dynamic, you're giving his brain something new to process, something it can't run on autopilot. In that moment, you both have to be present again. You're not just going through motions, you're engaging, adjusting, laughing, experimenting. That's the kind of presence that bonds people in a way routine never can. For a lot of men, novelty has a psychological impact that runs deeper than most people realize. It can make him feel more connected, more playful, more open. It's almost like his mind says, "Oh, she's still curious about me. She still wants to explore with me. She still sees me as someone worth surprising." That feeling is intoxicating because it takes him back to that early stage of passion. Except now, it's happening with someone he already loves and trusts. And this isn't just theory. Neuroscience shows us that novelty activates the brain's reward system, releasing dopamine, the same chemical that spikes when you're falling in love. In other words, you can literally recreate some of the emotional high from those first weeks together just by introducing something unfamiliar into the mix. You don't need a major overhaul. Sometimes the smallest shift, a new angle, a different setting, a spontaneous change, is enough to make him feel that rush, It's also worth remembering that novelty isn't purely physical. Yes, a new position can feel exciting in its own right, but the bigger thrill often comes from what it represents, a willingness to keep exploring each other. When you show that you're open to experimenting, you're sending the message that you're not done discovering him. That's powerful, because when people feel like there's still more to explore in a relationship, they stay more engaged, more invested, and more willing to put energy into keeping the connection alive. On the flip side, when novelty disappears completely, people start to feel like they've seen the full picture, like there's nothing left to learn. That's when passion can start to wither. Not because the feelings are gone, but because the experiences have stopped evolving. For men especially, who often tie intimacy to their sense of connection, that can lead to a quiet drift. They may not say it outright, but they'll feel it. And that's why introducing novelty, even in small, playful ways, can completely change the trajectory of a relationship. The beauty of this is that you don't have to become some master of technique or pull-off movie scene choreography. What matters is the unexpectedness. If you suddenly try something you've never done before, even if it's slightly clumsy at first, that in itself creates a rush. It's the same way couples laugh when they're traveling somewhere new together and get lost. The shared experience of navigating something unfamiliar bonds them, even if it's messy. When you start to think of novelty as a form of emotional connection, it stops feeling like performing and starts feeling like playing. And that's the energy that makes people feel truly close, because playfulness is one of the fastest ways to break through routine. You're giving him something he's not expecting, and in doing so, you're reminding both of you that there's still mystery here, still layers to uncover. And here's what's really interesting. Once you've done this a few times, you start to notice that he doesn't just respond in the moment. He starts looking at you differently outside the bedroom too. He starts anticipating that there could be surprises ahead. He feels more magnetically drawn to you because you've shown that you're not static, that you're still capable of surprising him in ways that reignite that early stage spark. So when you hear the phrase, novelty in the bedroom, don't think of it as just about spicing things up physically. Think of it as giving your relationship a little shot of adrenaline, a reminder that there's still more to explore, still more to be curious about. Because when you can make a man feel like the adventure isn't over, you don't just keep his attention. You keep his heart engaged too. A lot of people assume that the main reason couples stick to the same moves over and over is because they're lazy or they've run out of ideas. But in reality, the bigger reason is comfort. Once we've found something that works, something that feels safe and predictable, we tend to stay there. It's human nature. We like what we know, especially when it comes to something as personal as intimacy. And for women in particular, there can be extra layers to that comfort zone that make stepping out of it feel daunting. Sometimes it's about body confidence. Maybe you're worried about how you'll look in a certain angle or position. Maybe you've got a voice in the back of your head saying, "This isn't flattering," or "He might notice something I don't want him to see." Those thoughts can be enough to make you avoid trying anything that might put you in the spotlight in a way you can't control. It's not that you don't want to be adventurous. It's that the risk of feeling self-conscious outweighs the excitement of something new. Other times it's about the fear of awkwardness. We imagine that if we try something new and it doesn't go perfectly, it'll kill the mood. Nobody wants to be in a moment of connection and suddenly feel like they've turned it into a comedy scene. That's why a lot of couples settle into the safe set of moves that they know will work, because it guarantees a smooth, comfortable experience every time. But here's the problem with staying too long in that comfort zone. It's a bit like always going to the same restaurant and ordering the same dish. It might be great, but after a while, no matter how delicious it is, the excitement fades. You stop noticing the flavors because they're too familiar. And in relationships, that can quietly drain the spark without either person even realizing it's happening. What's interesting is that the very thing we fear, that awkwardness, that feeling of being outside our element, is often the thing that reignites connection. When you try something new, there's a little unpredictability. You might laugh halfway through, you might adjust and fumble, but those moments of playfulness are often far more bonding than a perfectly executed routine. They remind you that you're still exploring together, still creating new memories instead of repeating old ones. I've heard from men who say that some of their favorite intimate moments weren't the ones where everything went flawlessly, but the ones where their partner tried something new, even if it was imperfect. They remember the effort, the spontaneity, and the message it sent. I'm willing to step outside my comfort zone for us. That's what stays in their mind long after the moment has passed. Stepping out of your comfort zone also shifts the way your partner sees you. When he sees you doing something unexpected, it changes the energy. It reminds him that there are still new sides to you he hasn't seen, and that can be incredibly magnetic. It's not just about physical novelty. It's about breaking the unspoken assumption that everything about you is already known. That hint of mystery is powerful, and it's something comfort zones can quietly erase over time. And look, this doesn't mean you have to leap from zero to extreme. You don't need to suddenly transform into a completely different person. Stepping out of your comfort zone can be subtle. Maybe it's trying one of those positions he's hinted at, or changing the pace, or introducing a playful element you've never used before. It's about creating a little ripple in the routine so both you have to pay attention in a fresh way. The biggest hurdle is often mental, not physical. It's convincing yourself that it's okay if it's not perfect, that he's not there to judge your performance. In fact, most men are far more excited that you're willing to try than they are about how flawlessly you do it. They're not thinking, did she do it exactly right? They're thinking, she wanted to do this with me. That thought alone is a massive turn on, because it tells him he's worth stepping out of your safe space for. And there's another benefit. When you start challenging your comfort zone in this area, it often spills over into other parts of your life and relationship. You become more open to new experiences, more confident in your ability to handle the unknown, and more comfortable being vulnerable. That vulnerability is the heartbeat of deep connection, because it says, I trust you enough to let you see me when I'm not in control. The truth is, staying in your comfort zone feels safe, but it can quietly shrink the space where passion and adventure live. The longer you stay there, the harder it becomes to break out. Not because you can't, but because you forget what it feels like to take that leap. And sometimes all it takes is one small step outside to remind you how thrilling it can be to surprise yourself and your partner. When you make that choice to try to risk, to explore, you're not just changing the experience in the moment. You're sending a message that the two of you are not done discovering each other. And in a world where so many couples lose that sense of discovery too soon, that message can make all the difference. One of the biggest misconceptions about intimacy is that people always come right out and say what they want. In reality, the most telling things are often hidden in plain sight. In the little comments, the subtle reactions, the way someone's body language changes in certain moments. Men, especially, can be masters at dropping tiny hints about what they'd love to try without actually putting it into words. And if you know how to listen between the lines, you can pick up on those cues and respond in ways that make him feel completely understood. Part of the reason men don't just blurt things out is because of the same fears we've talked about before. Fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of ruining the mood. So instead, they sprinkle their desires into light-hearted remarks or indirect suggestions. He might joke about something he saw in a movie. He might make an offhand comment about a scene in a show you're watching together. He might linger on a certain movement when you're being playful, or subtly shift the way he touches you to guide you into a different position. None of these things are accidental. They're small experiments to see how you'll react. The challenge is, if you're not tuned in, these hints can easily pass you by. You might think he's just making a casual remark, when in his head, it was a carefully chosen breadcrumb leading to what he really wants. Men often put those breadcrumbs out there because it feels safer than saying, "I'd like to try this." That way, if you're not interested, he can play it off as just a random thought. No harm done. This is where awareness becomes your secret superpower. It's about listening not just to what he says, but how he says it. Does his tone change when he brings something up? Does he smirk a little when a certain scene comes on? Does he look at you for a reaction, even if only for a second? Those micro moments are often his way of asking without asking. And it's not just verbal cues. Physical cues can be even more telling. Maybe he naturally gravitates toward a certain angle during intimacy, even if you don't always go there. Maybe his hands guide you in a slightly different way, and then pause, as if waiting to see if you'll follow. These moments are like little invitations, and the more you notice them, the more opportunities you have to respond in a way that makes him feel seen. The magic happens when you respond to these hints without making it a big announcement. You don't have to say, "I noticed you wanted to try this." You just try it. You lean into that position he was hinting at, or you pick up on the playful energy he was giving off and take it a step further. That's when his brain lights up. Because you're not just doing something he's always wanted. You're showing that you understand him on a level that goes beyond words. This kind of attentiveness builds an enormous amount of trust. It tells him, "I'm paying attention to you, even when you're not speaking directly." And for a lot of men, that's a rare and intoxicating feeling. It removes the pressure from him to make a formal request, which can feel vulnerable, and instead turns it into a shared moment of discovery. What's even better is that once you start responding to his subtle cues, he becomes more comfortable giving them. He starts to trust that you'll pick up on the signals, and over time, those signals become more confident. Before you know it, you've created a feedback loop where he feels safe expressing his desires, and you feel empowered because you're part of bringing them to life. Some people think this means you have to be constantly analyzing everything he says or does, but it's not about turning intimacy into a science project. It's about being present enough to notice when something feels just slightly different. When you're truly engaged, you naturally start to catch those moments. You start to hear the extra meaning behind a joke, the curiosity in a passing comment, the intention in a playful touch. It's the same skill that makes someone a great conversationalist. Listening beyond the words, picking up on the emotion underneath and responding to that. In the bedroom, that skill becomes even more powerful because you're not just connecting through conversation, you're connecting through action, energy, and shared experiences. When you make it a habit to listen between the lines, you open the door to a kind of intimacy that feels effortless. He doesn't have to sit you down for a big talk about what he wants, and you don't have to wonder if you're guessing in the dark. Instead, you meet in the middle, in that unspoken space where understanding and desire overlap. And when you can meet him there, it makes him feel like you're not just his partner. You're his mind reader. That's the kind of connection that turns a relationship into something magnetic. Because he knows you get him in ways most people never will. If there's one thing that can turn trying something new from a nerve-wracking gamble into an exciting adventure, it's the feeling that you're in a safe space together. Because when the atmosphere is right, when there's no fear of judgment, no pressure to perform, no risk of your ideas being shut down with a cold reaction, you can explore anything and come out more connected on the other side. For most men, the hesitation to voice what they want isn't just about the request itself. It's about what happens after. They're thinking, if I say this, and she doesn't like it, will it change the way she looks at me? Will it make things awkward? Will it create a gap between us? That's why the environment you create together matters just as much as the words you say. A safe space isn't about agreeing to do everything your partner suggests. It's about making it clear that curiosity is welcome and that honesty won't be punished. It's about showing that you can hear an idea, even if it's not for you, without turning it into a moment of rejection or embarrassment. The truth is, you could say no to something and still have him feel excited to share with you again. If the no comes with warmth, playfulness, and the reassurance that it doesn't change the way you see him. Humor is a powerful part of that equation. When you can laugh together in the middle of experimenting, when you can giggle about the awkwardness of trying to figure something out, it removes the pressure to get it right on the first try. It turns the whole thing into something light-hearted instead of a test. Men thrive in that energy because it tells them they can take risks without fear of failing. And once they believe that, they'll be far more willing to open up about the things they've secretly been wanting. The other part of creating that space is leading with curiosity yourself. Sometimes people think safe space means sitting back and waiting for the other person to share, but in reality, it works best when both people are willing to bring ideas to the table. If you suggest something playful or different, it sets the tone that new ideas are part of your shared experience. That takes a lot of weight off his shoulders because now it's not about him being the one to introduce every change. It's a mutual process. And here's where the magic happens: when he sees you taking initiative, when he notices you're as invested in exploring as he is. It doesn't just make him more open in the bedroom. It makes him more open in general. He starts sharing more of his thoughts, more of his feelings, more of the things he might otherwise keep to himself. That's because the trust you build in one area bleeds into every other area of your relationship. You'll also notice that when you have this safe, open environment, the yes and no moments don't feel like opposites anymore. They're just part of the same conversation. You can try something, decide together it's not really your thing, and still end up closer for having tried. That's something many couples miss. That intimacy isn't just about finding what works, it's about building the trust that allows you to find out together. or men aren't usually longing for a partner who says yes to everything. What they're longing for is a partner who makes them feel that their desires can be voiced without risking the connection. When they have that, they relax. They stop filtering every thought and start letting you into the parts of themselves they usually guard. The beautiful part is that this doesn't require perfection. You don't have to master the art of reading his mind or create some flawless romantic setup every time. What matters is the emotional climate you bring, the willingness to explore, the patience to figure it out together, and the reassurance that nothing he says will make you pull away from him. Because in the end, trying something new isn't just about the act itself. It's about what it communicates, that you value keeping the connection alive, that you're still curious about each other, and that you're willing to take risks together. And when you create that kind of space, you don't just open the door for new experiences. You open the door for a deeper kind of love.